I want to take a little break from the farm this morning to show you all something that I think is hugely important to farming in my neighborhood and maybe your neighborhood too. So let's take a drive. It used to be that these were what I thought was the major threat to small farming and farming in general in our neighborhood. The creeping subdivision coming out from our neighboring city, Ithaca. But that's not the case anymore. See this farmland, and this farmland, and this farmland, and this land. Every acre of it all may soon be covered by solar panels. Let me get out and I'll show you why. It's because of these. These high-tension power lines run diagonally through our town. There was a coal-fired power plant that sat on the lake at the edge of our town, and recently that coal-powered plant shut down. It was 305 megawatts. These high-tension wires ran from the plant and they run all the way through and go on to service the electrical grid. But now the source of the power is gone. So new interests are coming in and they're threatening our farmland. Now this farmland that I've showed you is all within 2 miles of our farm. And the solar developers are making farmers an offer which is hard to refuse. They're offering to lease this land for about, and this is just the starting offer, 20 times what that farmer can get via leasing that land out for other farming use. We're talking about massive amounts of land here. Just within that 2 miles of my farm, we're talking about around 1,000 acres that they're looking to put solar on. Let me head back to the farm and I'll give you the details of the deal. Here's the deal. We have 4 solar companies that are competing with each other to lease up this land. And they want all the land around the power lines because it's easy to get the power from their solar farms into the grid that way. There's a lot of capacity. The solar farms sign a farmer up and they pay them a lease amount, which is kind of like an option on the land to reserve that land. So that lease amount is comparable to what a farmer would pay to lease land from another farmer. And the farmer can still farm that land while the solar company has the option. Now, if the solar company decides to take up that option and build their solar array on the farm, and these solar arrays can cover hundreds of acres for one array, that solar company will pay that farmer, like I said, about 20 times what that farmer can get out of leasing that land for agricultural use. And that also is probably multiple times what that farmer can profit off of that land by growing crops or livestock on it. The lease duration to begin with, and this is all flexible of course according to each individual farmer's negotiation, but the lease period, base lease, is around 24 years. They pay the farmer that amount every year, 20 times what it would be to lease that land. At the end of the 24 years, typically, the solar company has the option to lease that land for another 12 years and 12 years again. So you can imagine, for a farmer, that looks like an awfully good deal, especially if you're in farming for the money. Whenever you get a lot of money involved in anything, it causes tension between people, and it's caused tension in the tight-knit farming community that I live in. And here are the range of reactions. I've got at least 3 neighboring farmers who are saying, I'm going to lease it all. I'm going to lease all my land. I'm closing up the farm. I can make more money off the solar. Then we have what I call more sensible, I think, farmers who love farming and want to preserve farmland for farming use. They're saying, I'm going to take some of my marginal land, some of my land that's not real good for crops, and I'm going to put a piece of that into solar farming so that I have a buffer against a bad year on the farm. I can hedge my bets. That's the more responsible choice. And then we've got people who are in the community who are not farmers who are freaking out by having all this solar panels covering the fields around their house. They're understandably upset. And to add to all that tension, the solar companies who are coming around are sending representatives that don't know nothing. It's an old tactic from the big corporate playbook. Heck, when we had natural gas coming in here for fracking and they were leasing out options on the land, they'd send out these kids that didn't know anything. You couldn't negotiate with them. You couldn't get the specifics of anything with them. They just passed you a 3-page contract and wanted you to sign on the dotted line. And we've got some farmers that are kind of stepping over the line a little bit, and they're pushing other farmers to sign with one company or another. Who knows what's in it for them, but it's not a good situation. I think that any reasonable person should have a complex opinion about this whole thing. So take myself, I'm a farmer. On the one hand, I can view this as a way to save small family farms, to keep small family farms viable if they're using a portion of their land to provide that income buffer. On the other hand, there's a whole lot of bad things that can happen. I see whole farms disappearing to this development and further erosion of our way of life. But the thing that scares me the most is all these external corporate interests coming in and controlling the land that's around me. I don't trust them. I thought that this was the future of solar 12 years ago, a decentralized grid where every homeowner or farm owner had their own source of power. It cuts down on transmission losses. It makes a more resilient grid because everybody's a power plant, but that doesn't seem to be the future. Instead, we have small farms succumbing to what's called the way of the world these days, which is everybody conglomerating into bigger and bigger units, farmland being bought up by big interests, fewer and fewer corporations controlling more and more of our lives. It scares me. And you can bet with as much money that these corporations are bringing to the table, there's a nice fat profit in it for them. And that's profit that could have wound up in the farmer's pocket if they had the capital and the know-how to make these systems themselves, or hire a third party to put them in rather than somebody out of town coming and taking all the money. Who knows how much is on the table? It could be twice what the farmer's getting, 3 times. All that money's going out of town. And what about all the government money that's going to fund these systems? There's been a lot of money out there for solar in New York State, our state, as well as our country, the USA. And the solar companies are going to be getting it instead of individual interest. I'm not too comfortable with big companies getting government money like that in general, although that seems to be the pervasive thing that's happened to our whole government system, and it's the wrong way to go. And of course, there are lots of other questions that remain. What happens to the panels at the end of their lives? Are the panels made in America? You know, as a person responsible for this system, I know that I'm going to dispose of it responsibly at the end of its life, and I'm responsible for it. I have a personal responsibility to this land. If it's some corporation that's coming here and doing it, they're not going to care. They're going to find the cheapest place to get rid of it. And this stuff is not too good for the environment in some cases if it's not recycled correctly and it's just dumped in a landfill. Another hot topic these days is agrivoltaics, and so you may ask, is this agrivoltaics? It is not agrivoltaics. They're covering this land with panels that are low to the ground, and I'll put up a picture of what these big installations look like so you have a frame of reference. You can't do anything else on that land. Agrivoltaics is when you combine solar, usually located up high, with some kind of farming that's going on underneath, grazing cattle or grazing sheep, growing vegetables. This is not agrivoltaics. This is taking good farmland in some cases and covering it with something that you can't farm on. This is a complex issue, and I've had a hard time wrapping my head around how I should feel about it. I was an early adopter of photovoltaics. Our system's been in for 12 years. I spent a considerable amount of money because I felt that decentralizing the electricity grid and becoming more energy independent was the right thing to do for me as well as the whole country. So I led by example. As I've thought more about this, even though I think that solar is a good thing on the whole, we run into this argument of private landowner rights versus the common good. I believe that the common good is both having energy independence and also keeping small farms viable. Now here's where we run into problems with private landowner rights, because the landowners around me have a choice to either be responsible and take a piece of their farm to hedge their bets against a bad crop year and put that into solar, or they can do the irresponsible thing and just turn over their whole farm to solar, good land and bad. Putting prime farmland into solar production is an irresponsible use of that land, no matter how much money is in the game. And if you have to put your whole farm into that land, Myself, I'd be looking at my farming practices and seeing what I did wrong with my farm business and improving that rather than taking the easy way out. So that's my opinion on it. Clear as mud, right? Things like this should be complicated. To just fall on one side or the other of the coin is missing out on all the nuance that should make these discussions rich and important. I hope you do some thinking on this. I'd love to see your comments down below. I hope for a rich discussion. Have a good day, and I'll see you next time.